You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by
Jerome Horn.
Jerome. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. Happy that summer's almost here.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad to have you here. I always love looking at your backgrounds when we're on Zoom together. Obviously, the people at home can't see it, but you've reincarnated your the Micro Museum of Transit at your place in, I'm guessing, New York?
Yes, in Brooklyn, New York, the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn. And this is International Micro Museum of Transit 2.0 in various different forms than it was in Indianapolis. But very excited to explore setting up the collection in a different way.
Have you gotten any new things after you moved to New York?
I have several items that I haven't quite shared yet, but I've picked up a few new model buses, some actually articulated buses that I'm really excited about, and
Nice.
a few real subway signs from the MTA.
Nice. And you've got a new job. And since we last chatted with you anyways, how's that going?
Yeah, well, since we last chatted, definitely a lot of things have changed, but I now work at Transit Center in New York City as the Director of Transit Leadership Development. And Transit Center, we are a private foundation that focuses on national transit policy, advocacy, research, and now leadership development. And the job's going really well. Really honored to be at Transit Center. I'm surrounded by brilliant people, and I'm just excited to start this new program from scratch, even if I feel like I don't know what I'm doing.
I think you know what you're doing. You're also, I found out last week that you're also an expert on video game cities as well. Is that right?
Yes, apparently. Yes, there's this game, Cyberpunk, I think it's a 2077. Actually, this was a connection through the infamous NumTot, New Urbanism memes for transit-oriented teens. A person reached out to me and said, hey, I just want to talk to you about the transit system in this game. And so we kind of did sort of a fun conversation that was somewhat realistic, but also hypothetical, more of a utopian society. What would transit look like? But also some of the constraints that even exist in the virtual and real world, and what's realistic, what's not realistic.
We always have geometry.
Yes.
I always find those conversations really interesting when you think about video games generally and how they treat cities, how they treat transit. I mean, for example, there's always the SimCity discussion about how if they ever had to put in parking lots, the game would basically die. So they didn't do it, but it makes it kind of funny to see how it doesn't really, mirror the real world.
Absolutely. I think everyone is wondering when City Skylines 2 is going to be announced. I think there's a lot of things that the game developers will be considering. And, it's interesting, right? You wonder, you want it to be fun, and you realize it's a game, but at the same time, it's like, do the game developers have a responsibility to sort of reflect reality? You can just bulldoze a neighborhood and build a highway in the game, but in real life, that's, that there are consequences. So
absolutely. Yeah. Oh man. I remember when City Skylines #1 came out. That was so many years ago, but we had the game designer on the show so many years ago. And I love talking with her, but I was up late at night talking to her in Tampere. I think she's I think they're in Finland. So it's interesting to see kind of where they're coming from as well. I mean, it's obviously not a U.S. context. I hope City Skylines 2 has some of those little tweaks, especially for planners.
Exactly. I think one point that's been made, and this was even true in SimCity most of the time, you would start out with a highway connection and nothing.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, is that, cities, at least in the sense that we think of cities now, they were organic, and started in some cases, as little tribal lands and little villages and huts, but there was no mythical or magical highway just sitting there. But it almost, when you start from that context, it almost just says, oh, highways are an integral part of cities and we need to have them.
Yeah.
Instead of a different approach that thinks about people.
Oh yes, people are important, but forget those people when you're playing a game, right? Like they don't really exist. All right. Shall we get started?
Let's get started.
Awesome. Well, so this is episode 111. We're in session. Before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, Overcast, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. And thanks to everybody who's subscribing through their podcatchers. Okay, let's get to the news. Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. I did a show last week covering some of the things. We hadn't had a show in a couple weeks because I've had a couple of things going on, but we did cover a few things last week. But then I saved a couple for us because I thought that you would like some of these, and I thought that they would be fun too. But here's some of the top stories. So first off, the ethics of next day delivery. Are next day deliveries worth the strain on workers, street networks, and the environment? It's a question more people should ask as online merchants try to quench the demands of customers. As people order more items, it gets harder to consolidate deliveries, creating more trips and more environmental impacts. This was by Luke Winkie in The Guardian. So this piece was from a few weeks back, and I thought it was interesting that they designed the system almost so you can't bundle purchases now, meaning that they get things delivered separately, even if you make the orders at the same time, because they've made it so efficient that it's almost too efficient, which is something that friend of the show, Professor Ann Goodchild, actually mentions in the article. What did you think about this idea about, Amazon and deliveries and just-in-time delivery and all those things?
Yeah, this article really spoke to me personally because I admittedly probably order something on Amazon at least once a week or every other week, and it could be multiple items. When I stop and think about it, I say to myself, okay, yes, I live car-free and I walk, bike, and take transit everywhere I go. However, if I'm ordering, X number of items off of Amazon per week or every other week, is my carbon footprint really as low as I think it is? Or am I causing unintentional harm to our planet and environment by unnecessary trips? And I think what gets to me, when you go order something on Prime, and sometimes they'll give you an option. They'll say you can get it tomorrow, or we can bundle them and you can get them, a few days later or next week. And that question, and this article pointed it out. Really thinking about, hey, do I really need those pink socks tomorrow, or can they wait 7 more days? And so, yeah, definitely sort of a almost ethical thing going around in my head going, yeah, am I helping or hurting?
And it's really interesting, another thing that they brought up is, whether they've raised the expectations too much for, the just-in-time or next hour or even next day deliveries, where people are now expecting it, whereas before they might not have expected it because they didn't know any better, or they didn't know that this was actually possible. Or maybe they, could have had a system where you pay a little extra and you get it faster. But instead, we are all not we as society, but a lot of people are members of Amazon Prime, and so you just click that button and it's in your face the next day. And sometimes, to my surprise, actually, I'm like, wow, that I didn't expect it to get here that fast. It was kind of something that was later in the evening, but it's amazing how that happens. And so, are we trained now to expect this, even though it's environmentally damaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really central question. And, it's hard. It's like once you expose humans to something and they get used to it, it can be hard to break that. But I think it just speaks to a larger, part of our society of consumerism and instant on demand and social media, and having just knowing things and having things immediately rather than waiting. So, it's a good question. And, I'm not sure any of us can predict the long-term implications. But one of the things that I was thinking about in the article, where they said that some of the, drivers that are delivering would make 200 plus stops a day. And in my head, that just seems mind-boggling that that's even possible for one person to make 200 stops in a day. But then thinking logistically, what is that doing? That vehicle, those, that travel. So yeah, certainly something that I think is on a lot of people's minds in our urbanist sphere of, what implications does it have for cities, and what harm is this doing to neighborhoods? I thought that one thing, and I don't know if the article mentions this explicitly, but when I think about cities, especially really dense cities, if you have your wonderful 15 or 20-minute neighborhoods, is a solution to this to go, okay, you have your smaller packages and they all get sent to this central place in the neighborhood that you can walk to or bike to, and you go get them. Maybe your larger things that are unwieldy actually get delivered directly. But I'm just trying to think of, at what point, how much longer can this process scale up? And do we get to a breaking point? And what are some solutions to either mitigating that or trying to not get there in the first place?
I was thinking about that exact same thing. I was like, is there can you have an Amazon store that's in your neighborhood that keeps all of your packages for you? But then it's a store, so why would you go to a regular store? But then there's so many specialty items that you order that are not going to be at the Walgreens or the local grocery store. I think that's kind of an important distinction. But I agree with, is there a better way to do it to where there's a different way to locate the packages and put them in different spots? I guess Amazon's thinking about this with the locker deliveries, and Good Child's the freight group at the University of Washington in Washington State is looking at this as well. So there's a lot of thinking about going about this. And then there's also the cargo bikes and the electric e-bike, e-cargo bikes and those types of things for deliveries folks are thinking about. And then there's obviously the curb management issues as well. There's those things to think about too. When in major cities, when you have all these FedEx trucks, these UPS trucks, USPS, Amazon trucks, et cetera, running around, what does that do for traffic? What does that do for transit? What does that do for even bike lanes and stuff? You always see these pictures of people blocking lanes just to deliver a package, even though it's a little bit more dangerous for the cyclist to veer out into traffic. So there's all kinds of considerations that we should think about with this. And to your point earlier about the people and the delivery drivers and those types of things, I was fascinated to read about this. I mean, there was a guy who says he logged 30,000 miles, 400 routes. He has shifts that have him delivered to 70 separate 3-story buildings, 350 packages, 120 flights of stairs on his Fitbit. It's a lot of physical labor in addition to kind of the mental labor of figuring out where packages go. But there's also kind of and then there's the stress of delivery comes with a lot of other obstacles, like maybe the door doesn't open, so you have to bring it back. And it just seems like a lot. And mentally taxing to be a delivery driver.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think as we've seen in recent times, reflection of Amazon facilities trying to unionize. And when you think about the toll and the physical toll, and people's feet and lower back, and as you mentioned, also it's just psychological toll, it really does make you think about, well, this type of working conditions, this type of behavior is not sustainable. For me, it's always difficult because I think about a big corporation like Amazon and I go, but then I think, oh yeah, but I still order your stuff because it's like, it's hard to get away from, right? Even if you have that personal inner conflict and tension.
It's almost becoming like some of those utilities, like internet, because you have a choice of Comcast or Comcast, and sometimes obviously that's changing in a lot of cities, but a lot of places you have zero choices either. So it's hard to get away from the conglomerates in that way, and frustrating as well. There's a discussion to be had about antitrust
yes.
in that as well. So, well, shall we get to the next one?
Yeah, let's move on.
All right. Visualizing the legacy of racist urbanism. Using aerial photos, historic redlining maps, and archival photos, the blog Segregation by Design visualizes how the histories of highway and housing have impacted our urban fabric. After reading Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, the architect leading the project to create visualizations for 180 American cities wondered where the pictures were of the impacts, so set out to create them himself. This was by Gabe Boyd in Fast Company. So I found this to be true a number of times. Words don't always have the same punch as, say, an image or a map. And for me at my old job, I used to make maps all the time. And the idea was to tell a story, whether that was with where parcels were available for TOD or how much employment density was located in different parts of a region. In fact, actually after the LHD data came out in like 2003, the first one was I think in 2003 or so, and I started using it in maybe 2006. I put together this employment map of regions where you could see where the employment was in the region, and we could make it into clusters and things like that. And we took it around and we showed it to city leaders and to MPO folks and transit agencies, and they're like, whoa, I've never seen this before. I've never seen an employment map of the region. You always see housing density because it's easy to do with the census, but the employment stuff is a little bit more tricky. But it was easy to show with the map and show with kind of that visualization. So these images and maps really are something that changes people's perception, and especially on the subject, which has a lot of history and words might not convey the gravity of it. I'm wondering what you think about this kind of this move towards visualization versus just, say, reading the books like The Color of Law and others, where you can actually see what the destruction might be, what it was in the past. Those I'm always fascinated with aerial photos and things like that. What do you think about this move towards a visualization of these impacts?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. First, what do they say? A picture equals 1,000 words,
Right.
or even priceless in some circumstances. I think one. I think this is great. I think it's a wonderful idea. And thinking about the different ways that people learn. Some people are more visual learners. Some people like to read. But I think, especially with this topic in particular, since it has not been covered in a visual sense to this level, I think about these old books I used to read, the then and now books where you look at photos, from something historic to what it looks like today. And I mean, this is exactly that concept taken on a much bigger scale. And I actually happen to know Adam, the creator of these. I got to meet him a few years ago here in New York City. But I think the images are really compelling. And to just be able to look down and see the destruction of, these dense, walkable, often black and brown neighborhoods that were destroyed to put in different sections of highway, it really creates it's compelling. You see it. You can't deny that it happened. And, this actually even reflects with me personally, because my great grandmother on my dad's side of the family in Baltimore was displaced for the highway to nowhere, which is one of the poster childs of highways and the kind of destruction and scars that they left on cities. I believe this was a stub that was supposed to connect Interstate 70 to Interstate 95 by slicing through central Baltimore and even maybe across the harbor where the beautiful inner harbor is. And so having that personal connection there is interesting. But I think to add insult to injury, with that particular slice of highway, they actually left median space there for, at the time, the proposed Baltimore Metro East-West line, which was then even further explored with, the Redline light rail project that the current governor killed. But yeah, you just seeing these images and really looking at cities, I think a lot of people have not thought about the built environment, and that it literally is baked into the fabric of our communities, this destruction and these border vacuums that are created by highways and big stroads. And so, yeah, I think it's really timely, and it's really good to see an effort like this being pursued seriously.
Yeah, I love historic photos, and I love looking back on things. I mean, there's obviously the negative impacts that was had because of the destruction. But if you can go back and look and see, then you can, in the future, hopefully make different decisions. I think that I don't know if we're actually learning those lessons, because there's still a lot of highways being built. I think that Liam Dillon and some others at the Los Angeles Times did some work recently looking at how much people are still being displaced. I mean, there's a highway being built in Bakersfield where, if you actually look at the aerial photo, you can see the scar that's being put into place to build that new highway. So I don't know if we're actually learning those lessons. And in Houston specifically, they're expanding I-45 through downtown, and they're going to take down one side and make it kind of nice, but then the other one is going to be this kind of hulking mass where they're going to take away a lot of housing. And I remember driving downtown when I was younger and seeing all these houses, these housing projects that were built, affordable housing, and those have always been there since I was a kid. And in the image, in the image in the article, you can actually see the red line that goes over those housing units and how they would just disappear. And it's frustrating that it always seems to be the highway expansions that cannot be stopped for any reason, because progress. Right. And it's frustrating also that we can't see these highways as places that allow people to go through places instead of to places. I've said this many times on the show, but it's still frustrating to see that we haven't learned anything. And even today, I was doing the articles list, and I was looking up, pulling articles, and I found one in Salt Lake City where they're going to expand the roads in southwest of the region, where they had this whole Envision Utah plan to do a lot of really good stuff, and they had the Daybreak subdivision with light rail lines expanded to it and all this stuff, and then they're going to go even further out and build more roads, and they're arguing over whether it should be six dwelling units per acre or 8, and I'm like, that seems silly given you have so much pollution in your air all the time. So they're still doing it, and it's frustrating, and hopefully stuff like this can make a difference in making people see what happens when you kind of destroy the land, when you cut through urban areas with highways. And for me, it's just annoying, but it is cool to see how that all works and how it happens, especially the visualization of it.
Absolutely. I was thinking about, highway expansion. It's actually really interesting the way that LA Metro is set up, because LA Metro not only runs transit in the greater Los Angeles area, but they also fund highway projects. And there has been some talk that even with all the transit expansion they're doing, at the same time, with some of the highway work that will be done over the next 40 years or so, it may cancel out any greenhouse gas emissions created from expanding light rail and subway. So, it's such an interesting thing that I wasn't even aware of. And you just have to ask yourself, it's like, what problem are we trying to solve here? And who are we trying to help or not help?
Have you ever gone back on, do you have Google Earth or have you ever used Google Earth? There's like a Wayback Machine kind of thing on there where you can go back to whenever they actually first have aerial photos for cities. I think in San Francisco, it's like 1938 or something where they had an airplane, which it's really high resolution. It's kind of crazy that they got that. But you can see the sand dunes out, near the beach that are not housing yet and things like that. So you could also see where the railroads were and where those got cut up and where the highways weren't, et cetera. I'm wondering if you ever check that out or just kind of like go on a lackadaisical mission of kind of like fun day of searching through old historic photos.
Oh, certainly. I've definitely used that feature on Google Earth and Google Maps. I remember in Indianapolis, we were looking up, just spending some time with a friend there, and we sat there for multiple hours just looking at these images and thinking about how, when these cities were built, even in the US, for the most part, they were built densely and walkable, and just seeing kind of how things evolved because of the car over time is kind of sobering. But yeah, definitely have gone down a lot of rabbit holes looking at those old aerial photos of what used to be.
Yeah, super fun. All right, Boston's new bus network. A new plan from the MBTA was released Monday to increase frequency and service on Boston's bus network. The program would increase frequent service from 27 to 50% of routes and boost overall service by 25%. There could be some obstacles, including a driver shortage, but the plan should be seen as a positive step forward. This was in WBUR. Were you following this, the Boston network plan?
Yes, I've been following this.
What'd you think?
Yeah, well, I think the plan itself, from what I've seen, seems to be pretty solid. Especially, it seems like they're giving some good thought about putting more service in places where it's needed and for people who rely on transit more often Black and brown communities, lower income communities. So it's been interesting to see the plan evolve over time, and also how they think about feeding into the existing rapid transit lines with different routes. But this plan is, we've seen a number of bus system redesigns over the last decade or so. And I think we're at a very interesting point, and they talk about this in the article, where we have a lot of money for transit expansion, but we can't even maintain workforce to run the service that we did prior to the pandemic. So it's fascinating to think about more service when we're not even sure we can get back to where we were before the pandemic came, and the staffing shortfalls. I'll be really curious to see how that impacts this bus system. But one of their approach, I do think, might be interesting, because instead of doing, ripping off the Band-Aid, as we saw in Houston, where it was one bus network one day and then overnight changed completely, or Columbus, Ohio, I think Richmond, Virginia did the same thing. They're thinking about an incremental approach over time. And given our current circumstances, I think that might be a better approach to incrementally making the system better based on what you can do, rather than over-promising and under-delivering.
In terms of the worker shortage, I've seen a couple of agencies throwing out kind of big cash bonuses to hire people, and I think TriMet last week announced that they had a job fair, and I think it was like $2,500 bonus or something along those lines. It's a good amount of money. I'm curious if you've seen kind of the reasons for some of these shortages, for some of the labor shortages. Is it attrition through the pandemic and retirements? Is it people not wanting to go work for transit agencies because they feel like it's a stressful job? What's kind of the background on some of that? Do you know more?
Sure. And, this comes from my own personal, digging and talking about this at work at Transit Center. But one, I think it's important to give people context that this operator shortage actually started before the pandemic. It was definitely not as pronounced, but this was already a growing problem for the last several years. And it's not just money. The easiest thing to point to is money. And that is true in some cases. Bus operators definitely should be paid more. But what we find, and talking to operators and talking to other transit agencies and just people in general, one, what we're seeing here in transit is a microcosm of what's happening in larger society, where, especially over the past 2 years during the pandemic, a lot of people have had time to think about what's important to them or what's not important or the ways they want to live life. But for bus operators in particular, what we're seeing is that there's a few things going on. One, yes, we do have people that are retiring and not able to hire at a rate to get, to fill those positions in. But two, driving a bus is hard, and it's stressful on so many levels. Not just driving the vehicle itself and navigating city traffic, but disputes about fares with passengers, playing a counselor and a security officer and a driver and a psychic all at the same time. We ask operators to do the world for us to safely deliver people to and from their destinations. So one, it's the working conditions themselves. A lot of times we see schedules that are really challenging. There's a type of schedule or piece of work that bus operators have called split shifts, where sometimes they may come in, they'll do 4 hours, and then they have 2, 3, 4 hour break in between, and then they do another 4 hours. And so when you think about that, that's kind of a hard shift to work. But the other challenge that we're also seeing kind of has to do with the traditional setup of the unions and how seniority is prioritized. Because if you drive longer, you get to choose the better routes and the better times that fit your day. But if you're new, when you come in, you have to take the pieces of work that are available, which are often night shifts, early mornings, weird off hours. And we're seeing that a lot of people in this day and age just do not want to be subjected to having random schedules and working off hours. And that's causing some tension and really presenting an issue for transit agencies and unions thinking about, well, is there a possibility to find a middle ground here and reimagine, schedules and how work is doled out? And then finally, I think the other big piece is operator safety. We've seen increasing violence on transit, which is not a transit problem. And I want to be clear, because I think that always gets mixed up. It's like transit itself does not cause, homelessness, mental health challenges, or violence, right? It's because we have failed to take care of these issues in society on a larger context. But unfortunately, transit is usually the place where those things sometimes collect. But because of some of that, we're seeing people not want to work to be transit operators, because there are times where people are literally putting their lives on the line, or could potentially be put in harm's way. And so kind of all those things build up over time to create sort of the situation that we find ourselves in today.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about, here in San Francisco, we just finished the Van Ness bus lanes. And obviously there was a huge improvement in travel times. And I'm wondering if that would actually help the shortage, because we could actually get more buses down the routes at faster clip, and then they can cycle through the process a little bit faster. It seems like there is something to be said for dedicated lanes for bus priority, for actually reorganizing the system so that we're more efficient rather than just focusing on the one issue. There's so many other issues that can potentially fix the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a few blog posts and articles kind of allude to that, talking about, if we can run more buses, more often or more efficiently, then we won't need as many buses on a route. So definitely something that we should be looking into. And whatever the answer is, it's a holistic approach. As you said, it's not just one thing. It's multiple things, and really sort of a multifaceted challenge.
Yeah, and when you get off the bus, and I've said this a number of times, but when you get off the bus, make sure you thank your drivers. I mean, they are working hard and they're doing a lot, and I am appreciative that they can get me to where I'm going in a reasonable amount of time. I mean, it's amazing how efficient bus actually is when you think about it. So I just wanted to kind of share that, because I think that's an important thing to do too. And check out Boston's new network if you get a chance. There's maps and there's all kinds of stuff in the article. I'll have all these articles in the show notes if people want to take a look, but there's some cool stuff going on there. They're going to actually connect more, 275,000 more people. 275 wouldn't be that much. I'm spending all that money, but more people to frequent transit, to 15-minute service or less all day. So there's lots of good stuff in there. Okay, so finally we have two documents, or maybe actually three. I didn't send you one, and I apologize for that, but I'll go through it. But if I have three documents from the current administration on housing and transportation. So in the first one, the Biden administration has created a newly created housing supply action plan. The plan intends to focus on the problems of finding affordable housing and will focus on a few key areas, including rewarding cities and towns that reform their zoning codes, developing new financing mechanisms for mobile homes and other different properties, and missing middle buildings and ADUs, ensuring investors don't have access to government-supplied homes, and address supply chain issues to build more homes. So I think this is quite an ambitious plan. And from the rhetoric, of course, the devil is in the details. And I think Sarah Bronin, who is at Cornell, who is doing actually a national zoning map, has some worries about specifically how zoning is localized. And so it's kind of hard to have the federal level say, oh, change your zoning and the world will be free, which it doesn't really work like that. But something interesting to look forward to, hopefully, on this housing plan. What'd you get out of this?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, very ambitious and progressive of trying to move some things forward that we've been talking about in this space for many years. But as you said, the devil's in the details. But what, I really think, the zoning thing is key. And we know every great transportation plan is also a land use plan. And, zoning is sort of one of the big things that could really help transform our cities. But particularly thinking about single family zoning and how some cities have, made progress on that in the last few years, and how this could be a potential carrot to encourage other communities to do the same. Missing middle housing. That is such an important need. And often when we look at cities, the most desirable places are the places where that housing type is still located or still left from history, because we basically made it illegal to build, some of the housing that used to exist. That's a big contributor to our housing shortage. So I love that they're going to be trying to figure out how to deploy more mechanisms to build, housing, especially ADUs, and give people options, people of lower and moderate incomes. But I even think about myself personally, now that I live in New York City, and I think to myself, gee, I would like to own a home someday, but in New York City, I'm not sure where that falls for me. So I think this really affects people of all income levels and social classes, of just having that ability to have that asset and own that home. So happy to see that. And then for me, I've lately sort of joined this thought process of, we just need to build more housing, and we need to build a lot of housing. Sometimes people get into this rhetoric about, oh, we need more affordable housing. Oh, we just need housing. We need housing, and we need new housing now so we can have old housing tomorrow. So yes, I'm happy to see this plan, and hopefully we can push it forward, and see what happens.
I say that all the time. I don't care if it's affordable housing. I don't care if it's social housing. I don't care if it's Vienna style housing. I'll take it. Any for-profit housing. Let's do it all. Not just pick one and choose and make it harder on ourselves than it really needs to be. Let's build everything. I think that's really important. I'm interested in the kind of the total discussion in terms of how much housing that they think that they're going to build with this plan, and how ambitious they want to be. I know that they're saying that they want to, close the shortfall in 5 years. And I think they haven't learned from California and Gavin Newsom's claim that we could build 3.5 million housing units during his tenure, which is nowhere near that. And he said that at the beginning of his kind of gubernatorial campaign as well. We're going to do this, and we're going to blah, blah, blah. And then, obviously he's gone back and forth with the, labor unions and all that stuff. But I think it's a bit ambitious, and I'm wondering if it's actually possible, or whether they're overpromising. It feels like a little bit of overpromise, especially when they make those claims. The plan itself, there's a lot of really good stuff in there and the things to attack. But I was worried about that initial promise to fix everything in 5 years. I'm like, I don't know if you should be making that promise.
Yeah, as you said at the top of this topic, ambitious. You wonder, in reality, do they think, oh, I don't know if we're actually going to get here, but we're gonna say this much, but we'll be happy if we get half that. And it's hard to say, but the number does seem like it's pretty high. I think about a local example very close to you, Jeff. I mean, the historic laundromat.
Yes.
That finally has been demolished. And just how hard, I don't remember how many new units of housing that's going to be, but just
It's a fair amount. I saw a picture this morning. It's like a couple stories. It's like 4 or 5 stories, and it's gonna be
Yeah.
a lot of units. Yeah.
So just think about how hard it was to get that
Yeah.
little plot of new housing in a place like San Francisco, which is, a poster child for this issue.
Yeah. It reminds me, like around the corner from my house here too, is SB 50 was designed on a housing unit around the corner that used to be an old KFC, and then it turned into a sushi place, and the neighbors were arguing that it shouldn't be the same height as the buildings across the street from it, which was it was a ridiculous, obviously argument. But Scott Wiener saw that and then took it and ran and was like, this is ridiculous. Why can't we build a 4-story building in San Francisco along, Valencia? It's the perfect place for it. It's close to BART, close to access to the bike lanes and transit and all that stuff. And the folks up the hill were worried about parking, which always seems to be the case. A couple of things from this, I did want to go through a couple of things just to kind of review over, what's in the plan to a certain extent. So they want to reward jurisdictions that have reformed zoning and land use policies. So they're using the infrastructure bill in a way for this because they're giving higher scores on certain grant processes. And I'm wondering if this means that they're just saying that they're going to give higher scores to the New Starts process, which they've always been doing for good, zoning changes in the planning for that. So I was interested to see that. They're also saying that they're going to change TIFIA to a certain extent, which is the loan program for building. I know that they've used it to build, I think, the Crenshaw line and some other things for transit, but they also use it for roads. It's kind of a loan program for building infrastructure. Deploy new financing mechanisms to build and preserve more affordable housing where financing gaps currently exist. And so that means new loan types. And I know that for certain loan types or certain loan amounts, there's actually, under 150,000 or under 100,000, which is what a lot of mobile homes and manufactured homes go for. It's really hard to actually get, typical lending because the lenders just don't care about that amount of money. They don't want to lend at those levels. And so ADUs kind of go in that box too. And also, multi-unit missing middle housing, the financing for that is a little funky. And also ensure that the more government-owned supply of homes and other housing goes to owners who will live in them. So trying to get rid of Wall Street and the real estate investment trusts out of that box. And I think that's a really good point too. There's a little bit of kind of an interesting point about these homeowners associations that are trying to keep these folks out of the investors out, but they make it harder for renters generally. So I don't want to go that far. But I think that, anytime you can keep the investors out generally who are really bidding up the price of housing, that could be a bonus. So there's a lot of really good stuff in there. But as we said, the devil's in the details. Also, a lot of it is dependent on the Build Back Better bill actually passing, which passed the House, obviously, but is persona non grata in the Senate. So, there's a lot of kind of wishing and hoping on that too.
Yeah. The question is how much teeth do they have to get a lot of this through? And as you just mentioned, it's great to see the ambition. It's great to see the push for it, but we'll wait to see what unfolds. But glad that this is an issue that's being taken seriously, because anything, even if it's a small change or a small incremental movement towards improving the housing crisis, is a good thing in my book.
Yeah, build more housing. Also, I did forget to send this to you, but there was a release of $1 billion for this fiscal year and $5 billion over the next 5 years for the Safe Streets for All discretionary program. The program will fund the creation of local safety action plans or fund programs in an existing plan. So this is the safety program that is put together by USDOT, and I think they're going to be pushing on this because of, obviously we knew safety was an issue before, but, the release this week of knowing that 43,000 people died on U.S. roads. I wrote in my newsletter, and there was an article from Spain that got posted like last week, I think, that, basically showed that they had, a really low death rate on their roads in terms of per capita. And the U.S. is really far behind. I think it was like 1 in 43,000 or 40,000 or something like that. People died in Spain, and then 1 in 7,000 people died in the U.S. on roads. And then people got in this argument about whether it should be per mile, VMT and all that stuff. And I'm like, no, we gotta start thinking about this from a protection standpoint, where we're looking at how many people we can save from this horrible death through collisions on the road. So there's a lot of that going on, and hopefully we can fix that. I know you didn't read that piece, and maybe you had heard about it over the last few weeks, but there's some money out there for safety on the roads, which I think Stephanie Pollock and maybe Robin Hutchison was a part of before she went to the motor carrier, the truck side of things. And also, the administration also released a technical assistant guides that points out $700 million from 65 different technical assistance programs to help cities, towns, agencies, regions, states apply for infrastructure money for their projects. I think the biggest problem are from a lot of these places are seeing is that they need the money, but that they don't have the ability to apply for it. There's a kind of a technical assistance or a capacity shortfall. And I was actually, when I was writing my script for this, I was actually thinking about when you were in Indianapolis, and if there was any times when you all felt like there's some money out there you could have gotten, but maybe there was a kind of a shortfall in staff that could apply for it, or wasn't something that you could go after. Was that something that happened to you when you were there?
From the time that I was at Indigo in Indianapolis, I think we're rather fortunate that we had a few people on staff that wrote some pretty compelling applications, which is how we kind of got our funding for our Redline BRT project. And so, we didn't so much deal with that problem at my time in Indy. But I think I'm glad to see this initiative, because it is so true. You see communities, particularly smaller, maybe less prosperous places, that do not have the human power or the technical know-how, the grant writing skills to figure out how to apply for these pots of money. And so it's great to see all this technical assistance coming through and helping point out that different pots of money can be flexed in certain cases as well, which is huge. And I know, this is not, I don't think this is specifically talking about like certain pots of highway funding that we know can be flexed for transit projects. But this is really good because the awareness needs to be there that, you can, there's money available, and really making sure that communities aren't left behind. If they're true to their word here, it seems like this program is going to have a big impact on allowing communities that maybe historically have not been able to have access to these funds get that access.
And why I love this is because I feel like this document and the listing of all these resources is what the government actually should do best, right? Yes. They should actually be providing like assistance for folks to try to get this money. And it's interesting. One of the most popular items on the Reconnecting America website, by far, more tens of thousands of clicks on this item than anything else when I was there, was actually a guide for getting TOD technical assistance funding through the federal programs. So whether it was through HUD or TOD or FTA or other things, like that was like the most popular by far with Google Juice. And it was amazing to see like this kind of thing, actually the feds actually create this, because it's very popular. I mean, there's a lot of agencies and folks that really, really want this information, but it's just not compiled in the way that's understandable or that's actually easy to access. You have to go through all these websites, and it can be like a maze, to get through some of that stuff. But if you compile it for them and you put it together and you say, here are all the programs that are available for you, I think it's super beneficial and it's super helpful, because I've seen it before. I mean, like I said, it was super popular, and there's so many folks that are craving information that is actually out there. It just needs a little bit of love.
Yeah, well, and I think you said it. This is something that government should be doing anyway. And I think in the past, sometimes we relied on advocacy groups and other people to policy wonks, people to like translate this into digestible bits that normal people can understand what this money is for and how it can be used. So yeah, once again, it's a great effort. Happy to see all the thought that's going into this. And a lot of these organizations, they putting a lot of emphasis on equity. And I think equity has become somewhat of a buzzword, but it is pretty much central. If we take care of all of our equity concerns, there's typically also our climate concerns, and the people that are impacted the most by climate change also sort of fall into those same categories. So I'm glad to see the emphasis there and kind of connecting those two together, we need to, tackling these things, address multiple emergencies and crises that we're facing.
Yeah, for sure. And on this last week's Talking Headways, Stephanie Gideby-Jenkins and Helen Chin were on the show, and they were talking about their initiative that's actually helping some of this with this technical. And there's a list of actually nonprofits and NGOs and philanthropy in the technical assistance document that are going to be hopefully helping folks who might not have the capacity to get some of these grants and maybe write some grants and those types of things. But they were on the show talking about that last week, so was happy to have those folks on to talk about it, because they did a really good job kind of outlining some of the issues that are coming out, especially when what you mentioned in terms of equity and environmental justice, because there's a lot of discussion about it, but whether it's actually embedded the way it actually should be is another question. And so, there's a lot of discussion this week about Justice 40, and they were saying that we should, Justice 40 sounds good and everything, but it should be Justice 100, right? It should be everywhere and everything. So I think that's an important point to make, and I think that's actually good that they came on the show and kind of went through that and talked about it. So thanks to them for coming on. Also, I think one of the other examples I think I forgot to mention was Oakland. At large cities, it's not just the small cities that have some of the problems with getting technical assistance or getting funding. It's some of the large cities too who are underfunded in their transportation departments. So I know a number of years ago, I don't know if this is still the case, but a number of years ago there were lots of grants even through California. The state of California is really good at having programs and stuff for active transportation and those types of things. And Oakland, they wanted to do a couple of grant applications, but they just didn't have the capacity, and so they were trying to hire people and get people going. So it's not just the small towns and the small agencies and stuff like that. It can be the big cities too that need a little bit of help. So I think it helps everybody for this program. So I think that's good.
Absolutely. And I guess the one other thing I would add too is, you mentioned the 43,000 deaths, and we've in other contexts, if there were things every year that killed 40,000 people, we would probably stop and go, there's a big problem here. And it's almost like we've just said in the United States, that's the price for freedom to drive everywhere and roads. And I'm glad that there is official recognition from even those in government saying, yeah, design does play a factor in this. And so we need to, mitigate that and design better roads and better streets, and think about, as we talk about complete streets that are for everyone. And so I'm glad to see that there's an emphasis there, and it's coming from the top, that we really need to focus on the design of streets and how they've really just prioritized cars and really lead to these situations where it's no surprise that we're seeing as many deaths as we are.
Yeah, and that was actually, you actually reminded me to say this, but that Spanish article was they actually lowered their speed limits in cities to 20 kilometers an hour and 30 on main roads, and then 40 on the bigger streets, and it actually reduced their deaths. I can't remember the exact number, don't quote me on it exactly, but it was like 20% or something like that. When 20% is not a big number when you have so little deaths anyway, which is a good thing. But they actually prioritized that, right? That was like an important thing, because they were like, well, we want to get to zero. that's the right. And we always say that too. We want to get to zero deaths. So thanks for reminding me to share that, because I think that was important. Okay, so this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways wouldn't be here without you, so thanks very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up every month during the pandemic, and we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month and you get some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month and you get our bus-only scarf, which I still have some bus-only scarves for Patreon supporters, and I'm about to order some more. And I have I actually have a bike-only scarf that I'm going to put out too, which is going to be pretty cool. Some fresh Kermit on there, which is going to be exciting. So if you want to get one of those, let me know. I'm going to have probably a pre-order or something up soon, I hope, because they take a little bit of time to make, but they'll be here at some point in the next few months or so. Like I said, it's going to be cool. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a lighter weight. It's going to have bike only. It's going to be green, and it's going to be cool. So check it out when you get a chance. Listener questions and comments. If you have a comment or question, feel free to tweet at us or send us a message on any of the social sites where the podcast appears. You can reach us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. I don't have any this week, but send them in. I love your questions and your comments, your emails, all that stuff. It's really great to read folks what they're thinking, especially in response to some of the discussions we've had. Tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I am more than happy to read it out on the air and share your opinion. Puppies and Butterflies. This is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. Jerome, do you have Puppies and Butterflies this week?
I do. So for me, it's actually something very personal. So I got a new bike.
Nice. That is definitely a puppy and butterfly to me.
Yes, it's like a dream. It's my dream non-e-bike. It's a Priority 600. Priority Bikes is actually located here in New York City, but it's like the ultimate super commuter bike. It has like, it's belt driven. It has an internal gear hub. It's
Nice.
just disc brakes, fenders, lights that are powered by dynamo from you pedaling. So really excited to get the bike. And definitely biking here in New York City is different than biking in Indianapolis. I was
I can
very
imagine.
spoiled by the cultural trail and some of the great greenways we have. So that's an adjustment. But yeah, for me, it's just very exciting. I went to the bike shop, rode it home uphill, and the gear range helped a lot. But it's just amazing what biking does for like your mental health. It's just not only a form of getting from one place to another and recreation, but there's just so many other benefits. So for me, my life is so much full of joy right now because I have a new bike.
That's awesome. Yeah, you can cover so much ground and you can kind of absorb the community around you, and it's really freeing to get on a bike and go around. I used to, not as much nowadays and with the pandemic, but I used to go on these really long bike rides around San Francisco, and I felt like a little bit more connected to the city, trying to go in different neighborhoods and seeing kind of if the house changed this week versus last week and those types of things, kind of doing the rounds, as it were. It's super fun. So I can see how you are very excited about the bike, and I hope it gives you many, many years of joy.
Yes, yes.
Well, this week I wanted to go to Hull, England, where they're creating bus stops for bees. They actually are putting up bus shelters with living roofs and flowers so that the bees have a safe place to be. But I think a lot of other cities are thinking about this in terms of wildlife corridors and that. I know that this has been something that other cities have done in the past. I know this isn't the first city in England, but I thought this was cool. It was in the BBC local edition there in Hull. So pretty cool that folks are making this happen, and hopefully we can keep those bees, those butterflies, and those hummingbirds happy around the world with these bee stops. Have you seen any of these live? Have you seen any of them live?
I don't know if I've seen a bee one live, but I was the last time I was in Philly. I think it was last summer. I think they did some renovations to one of their transit centers, and it sort of had like a green roof,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
so it was really cool to see. So yeah, I haven't seen a bee one in person, but I love this. I love thinking about reimagining our infrastructure and how we can better integrate it into the environment and think more naturally. And of course, in especially big cities with urban heat island effect, anything we can do to decrease the amount of surfaces that are just barren concrete or steel or metal, is a good thing. So that's really exciting to see. Something simple like that can have, it's a big impact for the bees. It may not be a big impact for us humans necessarily, but for the bees, I'm sure that adds up.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. And we need to add up for them and all the other biodiversity around the world. Well, Jerome, where can folks find you online?
Everywhere. No. Yeah, I'm very prominent on Twitter. You can find me at JAHORNE there on Twitter and Instagram, and then also on LinkedIn if you want to look me up, as I share a lot. I'm very passionate about what we do in transit and urbanism. So always welcome new connections online.
I love your passion. I love your passion. Well, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire, at TheOverheadWire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. Thank you, Jerome, for being here. We really appreciate it. We'll see everybody next time.
Talk